once. Isn't that enough? So what I will do today is I will explain to you why, having invented it once, I now have to reinvent it. And it's going to be hard work, and a lot of you may be involved with this. But I hope that you will find it a very satisfying movement to get involved in. So what I'll talk about then briefly, I'll start off going back to those days. I'll explain, because sometimes people get them confused, the difference between the web and the internet. Talk about inventing the web, and then about the arc that the web has taken from there, through various hopes and dreams, to where we are now. And discuss what a lot of people, I think, now think about the project. And so going back then, to start with, going back to so let's go back first to 1969, okay. Vince Cerf and colleagues invented the internet back in 1969. So in 1989, the internet was been out there. It had been developed by ARPA and DARPA in the US. It has spread mostly through US universities. I was working at CERN, a physics lab in Geneva, and so it just got to the point that it was becoming appropriate to use it in Europe. The Europeans wanted to make their own international standard internet, but they realized that the internet that the Americans had put together actually worked pretty well, and so they might as well use it. And so it was becoming politically correct in 1989 to use the internet in a physics lab. Physics lab was a really interesting place where also at that point it was getting to the point where physicists had nice monitors on their desks. They had mini computers, they had Unix machines. And so there were people who had pretty nice technology, and they were starting to get those connected together. But also CERN was a place which I found very frustrating. It was exciting and great and wonderful because people came from all over the world. And when they came from all over the world, they brought all kinds of different computers, which in a way is fine. But it also meant that every time that you talked to somebody about how to make the bit you're designing connect to the bit they're designing, you found that you had to learn some documentation system, because they brought their own documentation system with that. Or they didn't know their own one. Often physicists are very creative people, and they can all code. So if they find that the documentation system they're using, or the help system that they're using, isn't up to snuff, they'll just make another one. So there are a huge number of these things, and they didn't interoperate. You couldn't go to one help system and find your way to the others. They were all separate silos. But that was normal. And when I thought how nice it would be, given the fact that these things are all networked, to be able to have them so that they all the documents in all the systems seem to be just like one giant book that you take your way through. It was really hard to explain that. In fact, I talked about it with various people on my team, and one of the nice things was that my boss, Mike Sandel, he let me, I gave him a copy of my memo about it, and he couldn't immediately start a huge hypertext project at CERN, because CERN really wasn't the place, didn't have any way of doing big hypertext projects, but he did let me do it in my spare time. Unfortunately, he died. He suffered from cancer, got diagnosed with cancer about that time, and he died 10 years later. But when they went through his things, his wife Peggy found that he had the little memo I'd given him. Relatively small number of copies went out to various people at CERN, but he'd written on top of his, in pencil, vague but exciting. So Mike thought it was vague but exciting. So maybe that's why he let me do it. And there was a twinkle in his eye, because I think he realized that because he was a bright guy, realized that it could be really interesting. The sort of thing where it's really interesting if everybody would have done it. The web spread in the early days because of people who would appreciate that. They listened to me explaining a web which didn't really exist at the time. There was only I only had one or two web servers. The first one about the World Wide Web, info.cern.ch. And but a few people would think, if everybody did this, it would be pretty amazing. Therefore, I will do it. And so it started with people that had that spirit, and it started to spread. It soon started to pick up. I think the reason that it picked up is I looked at a lot of the existing systems out there, and I realized that they were each of them constraining you in particular ways. Some of them would only work on one type of computer. Some would require you to store documents in one particular format. Others would have different constraints. Others would be only for academic papers. Other things would be only for instruction manuals, and so on. And I realized that if I was going to get all these things to interoperate, the system had to be universal. It had to have this property of universality. And so the design of that was it should be universal. It should ask nothing, as little as possible for anybody who joined the project. There was a big ask. You have to give each piece of your document, you have to give it a URL. You have to give it one of these things, http://. And that's a big ask already. So I couldn't ask also for, by the way, you must pay me 2 cents. So the thing would not have taken off if I'd have made it, if it had been proprietary. And fortunately, CERN that wrote a famous letter to the community which said that they would not be charging patents. So that was a very important part of the growth of the web. Another important part was when I moved in '94 to MIT, founded the World Wide Web Consortium. That was people coming together to go a long way. If you go fast by yourself, that's what I did by myself at CERN with them looking over my shoulder. But to go, as I heard this morning, if you have to go a long way, you need to get together. So consortium was what we needed. The people working in the tech industry at the time, they were excited, but they wanted to be able to be involved in the development of the standards. The reason why the web works is that all the computers involved speak the same HTML language. They all speak the same HTTP language. When they see a URL, URI, and they treat it, they know what it means. They treat them in the same way. So it's all about standards. So the growth then of the web was about standards. And so that also a lot of work, a lot of really hard work by the initial, admittedly, white males that typically would be involved in the web initially did put a lot of work in, and they did become quite diverse across the world, but also they put a lot of work into internationalization to make sure it would work in lots of different languages and cultures, into web accessibility, so that it would work for people with who had disabilities, and later the Mobile Web Initiative, because we realized that if it was going to get to the majority of the people on the planet, then it wasn't going to happen on desktops, it was going to happen on mobile devices. So the W3C is still now going strong and has more and more work, more and more stuff to do. W3.org, you can go and find the consortium. But now, so if you step back and you're going to look at the arc of this web and what was it actually, what was actually happening on it. Initially, well, even before the web, people were looking at the idea that you could just communicate over telephone lines electronically, that you could leave messages for people on message boards. They thought this could be potentially revolutionary for human democracy, for human science, for human culture. People were quite utopian about it. John Perry Barlow, for example, in his manifesto, felt that if we just can connect with technology, then everything would come out necessarily better. And to a certain extent, when you look at the early growth of the web, there were lots of ways in which it did generate a lot of value. Let me just give you one example of one of the many things happening on the web. Okay, let's look at just the blogging, this thing of having what was called a weblog. Just a list of it started off a list of things that I thought were important, then the blog, as it became a new genre of writing. And in those days, people, when they blogged, they would blog carefully so as to try to do a good job, something they were proud of. Because partly they were really, the only thing driving, there was no advertising on the web back in those days. And so they were driven just by the kudos of knowing that people liked their blog, and maybe through comments, or maybe just through the fact that the little counter at the bottom of the page went up. So people wrote blogs, and they did, I suppose, two things. They made sure that they made the blog really good, but also they had links. They knew that people came to their blog partly to find the links to other blogs that they put in theirs. And so this ecosystem was created where everybody was searching for the best things to link to, outdoing each other in finding the latest really good thing, and being and in there would only into things which passed a review of being something that they wanted to recommend. And so as a result, each page strove for excellence, and not in both the contents and the links. And as a result, the blogosphere, as it was called, became something which was great value, huge amounts of stuff on the web about all kinds of subjects, but also really great to be in, part of, very enabling. People felt that, I can plug my computer to the internet, I can blog on it, and people will come and read my stuff. And I'm on the same level as all of the other people out there, including all the people out there on the web, including the big news organizations. People can find my blog just as interesting as something out from the big news organizations. And so that is an example of something, of a process on the web, where people loved being part of it. There was a great spirit, but also the net value produced was huge. So when people looked at, analyzed the web, and in fact, if they looked at if you drew a graph of the, this is here of the readership of websites, for example, you start off with a high, but then it turns out that whereas if you look at something like TV sites, there's only a few, and the first few TV stations would dominate, and it would fall off, and any other TV radio stations would sort of, there won't be very many, and they wouldn't have very much readership. But the web was different. The second, third, fourth, fifth, the websites, in fact, they were very similar. There were lots and lots of websites which had, in fact, as you go down to the hundredth or thousandth most popular website, still, they were pretty popular. So then this graph looked different. It had a lot of, it was thicker. They called it the long tail. People wrote a book. There was a book about the long tail that was a phenomenon. And economists recognized that on the web, something was going on that, unlike in the situations like TV stations, where there's mostly centralized, in this decentralized world, the value is in the long tail. And the value was with serious, real value. Real value that a user could you could go on, you could search. Later, when Google came along in the late 90s, and you could search and find, zoom into this space of medium and small people putting things online. And Google used the fact that then Google session was built, in fact, to use the fact that those links were so carefully chosen. That was the key to how effective it was. So there's an example of something famously, which in fact produced a lot of value. If you look at the web now, you don't find a long tail. If you do, there's some things which endure. Of course, another great example was Wikipedia. What was interesting about Wikipedia, from my point of view, was that it started off as being a really simplistic website where anybody could edit any page. The wikis were they were just a free-for-all. And then Wikipedia was one of the many wikis where they decided, we do have to have some process. We do have to have some concept of a meritocracy. We do have to have a way of locking a page. We have to have a process for unlocking it and so on. And so so they developed a process. And that process has allowed people all over the world. It's not perfect. It's got lots of biases to English, for example. It's not as well represented in lots of other languages. But it is a brilliant example of something on the web where I call it a social machine. It's people do the work. The machinery, the website itself provides just provides the arbitration and, if you like, the bureaucracy of it is done by the website, but people provide the creativity. So Wikipedia is another neat thing, and it still is. And so you would have been forgiven, I think, sort of 10 or 15 years into the now 30-year-old web, if you'd have looked at it and been rather optimistic for the future. If you'd have thought that, if you'd imagined today, we would be looking at a world where democracy and science are very, very powerful because everybody out there is informed, because there are things like Wikipedia, the processes like that have produced a level of truth and also the political battles that have taken place in a place where politicians are held accountable, and anything which they might missay is immediately corrected. And so that, and of course, because the internet doesn't really know about national boundaries, or didn't back then, you might imagine, you might be forgiven for imagining that we'd have a lot more international harmony, because we would have, after all, international disharmony often comes from misunderstanding, and misunderstanding is fixed by communication, so more communication should be more harmony, right? Well, so now look at the arc of the web, look at where we've got to now. And if you go out there in the street, or talk to people at a cocktail party, then what do they talk to me about? They talk to me about many things. They talk to me about fake news. They worry about clickbait. So it turns out that whereas bloggers here work pretty well, that if you then drive it by ads, and then you leave ads as the only way of rewarding somebody, and then you have two competing websites, and one has nice, responsible links, but the other one has clickbait, where you click on something and it takes you, which looks like a very enticing title of the link, and it takes you something completely different. But by that time, they've scored their click. Somebody's got some money from the fact that you've been diverted. So now I think a lot of people are actually finding they're not so happy with it. People come to me and they're not happy about the state of the world. They're not happy about the fact that, in fact, even though there is a web, there are websites out there, most of the people spend their time in just one social network. And so, in fact, their experience is not of going around choosing links between different blogs. It's about sitting there in an environment controlled by one company. And even though that company puts a lot of effort into making the environment as good as it can be, then we've got that we don't have innovation, because when you get such consolidation in a business, it always happens that when you have a monopoly, then the monopoly is the only place that can do research, and it's the only place where you can really introduce new products. You can only get things into Facebook if you work at Facebook. And so there are lots of wonderful people who work at Facebook, just as there were lots of wonderful people who worked at AT&T Labs when it was a monopoly. Lots of people who worked at Microsoft when it was a monopoly. But having a monopoly means that your innovation just drops. And so people tell me that they're not so exciting out there. That when you're looking at starting a company, there are lots of areas where you can do it. There's lots of areas where you feel you're just waiting to be stomped on by a very, very large company. So, not happy. People are not happy. That unhappiness, I think, clickbait and fake news was our universal concern. Privacy, obviously, is a huge one. And I think it got to the point where GDPR was in the offing, but a tipping point, I think, for a lot of people around me was when the Cambridge Analytica debacle, scandal, that suddenly made not just thinking people like you and me, but everybody in the street started to be aware of the issue, of their data being misused. Not just misused, they'd always been worried about being misused to give them a bad give them a bad rating on their insurance or something. But now we're realizing it can be misused in bulk. That it be misused as part of sort of manipulating people en masse into voting particular ways and so on. So the Cambridge Analytica was a tipping point. After that, I think those of us who were looking at alternative systems and alternative technologies found that the water level has risen. We felt we were trying to sail off to a better place, but suddenly we're on the way. So we had to move. So let me tell you then. So the third part of this is telling you about the new movement. This is, which has started, yes, it's called Solid. The company is called Inrupt. Inrupt is spelled like, it starts like innovation, and then it has a bit of disruption in it. And so Inrupt.com is it's a little startup. Okay, I'm telling all you people about it, but it's just this little startup, and it's been working trying to stay under the radar for a bit, but the secret is out because we, Inrupt.com came live with a message last weekend, but with a message that we're interested in developers getting involved because we're building a new platform. We're building a platform which uses the web technology. It is web technology, but it uses web technology in a way which is as simple but completely different. So it uses web technology in a way that gives people complete control of their data. And when you ask somebody, so would you like to have complete control of their data? I can't. You know, it's stuck in the silo. It's stuck in the silo. It's stuck in LinkedIn. It's stuck in ResearchGate. It's stuck in Facebook. Well, okay, let's imagine another world. Imagine a world where when you started an app, maybe you're going to plan a meeting. Maybe you're going to take some photos. So you start your app, and it's the first time you've used it. So it says, okay, Martin, where do you want to have this? Where should we put the data? So you think, well, these photos, they are home photos. Well, I'm taking them at work. I'll share them with some people at home. But well, actually, they're really work photos. So I'm going to put them in my work storage. I've got home storage, and I've got work storage. And I've got, when I do stuff with the club, I've got club storage. But now, so Martin now has got places that he can put data, and he's got a choice. Solid is about choice. It's about users having choice of where they put their data, and a separate choice of which app they use. So you can use one app for managing, and he can put his data into his work pod, but then when he shares it with the people at work, then he might use one photo app for putting it in. They may use different photo apps for looking at it. The idea is we have interoperability, we have standards, hard work, difficult. But that's what makes the web work, that's what makes Solid work. So the idea is that you have lots of choice of apps as well. So there's a separate market for data, a separate market for apps. How does this work? Well, we define a common interface. The way you write the photo app, or any app, is you write it to use the Solid server just without the Solid server knowing anything about really what you're doing. The Solid server is just an open book. The Solid server is like an empty Scrabble board. Then the Solid app then writes, it's like filling in the Scrabble board. The Scrabble board doesn't know what it's being used for, but it doesn't matter. The apps write things in slowly. This stuff we call linked data spreads, like a big crossword being filled in. Crossword spreads. Another analogy, it's like as though it was a petri dish full of agar, growing medium and mold, and in a scientific experiment you're studying mold spreads across it. I think maybe I prefer the Scrabble board analogy. But in any case, it's sort of the spontaneous order emerges, that people anywhere can use a Solid app. In different places they use Solid apps. And because it's all about linking data, it means if I planned an event, and it realizes it connects with your event in some way, then I can link